Well, hi, everybody. I see Kirak in the chat. Steve, give us Steve. I'm here. Hi. Hi, everybody. Um, and look, you're starting shit in the chat already. My God. Yeah, some random geek. All right, political discourse already. Let's go. Yes, and it's Friday the 13th, the anniversary of the day that Jason took Manhattan. I remember it so well. Anyway, thanks everybody for joining me. And as usual, I will be responding to questions first thing from my wonderful Patreon patrons and channel members. So if you are with us in the live chat and you have something to ask me in the chat or something you want me to talk about, or just, you're planning on being generous and tossing in a super chat or something like that, if at all possible, please hold those things until I get through the pre-submitted patron and member questions, because while I'm answering the patron and member questions, I will not be paying attention to the live chat. So it's quite possible that I will miss your thing you wanted me to see. So yes, Jason Takes Manhattan is a bad film, Kirak, but a delightfully bad one. It's a lot of fun. It's not a good movie, but it's a lot of fun. So anyway, let us begin with the patron and member questions. And the first one of those comes from Some Random Geek. Also known as an always tired Some Random Geek. Sorry to hear that. So, Steve, this is what I am doing now. When I'm completely tapped out of money until payday, like I was since Thursday the 5th, I've borrowed money from the joint checking account my brothers and I share. We share that account for rent and bills. We always give more than what is exactly needed for rent and bills, so there is about $3,000 in there now. I figured this is the only way to make sure that Joanna Roberts gets the money she needs for food and pills. She has no money for food and pills since the 5th. This is what I have to do now, since it feels like those who are willing to give Joanna Roberts money can't afford to. And those who can afford to aren't willing to. Let's not forget Joey and Phoenix, Naz and Linequin still have to ask for money from time to time as well. If I don't give money to Joanna, she starves. I guess I still have to figure out giving $1,000 or more each month. Got to work 72 hours a week, I guess. I mean, Steve, am I wrong? You're the one in the situation, not me. So if that's the way that you tell me it is, then I'm certainly not going to tell you you're wrong. And as we've talked about before, I'm not going to tell you that you're doing anything morally wrong by doing that. I think it's great and very commendable that you work so hard and stretch yourself so thin to take care of your friends. I think that's great. It certainly speaks to your character and to your compassion. But as I feel like a broken record. Like I say this every time you bring this up. Just be sure to keep taking care of yourself. Because if you stretch yourself too thin, then you won't be able to help anybody, most of all yourself. So just keep. Obviously, it's very important to you to keep helping your friends out, and I think that's great. But look after yourself. That's all I ever say to you when you bring these things up. Just save some for yourself, because that's important. Nitro. Hey, Steve, longtime watchers here. Love your format. We're attempting to mature our own channel and content on this platform. Would you be amendable to utilizing us to upscale some of the stills, clips, footage you intend to incorporate into your one or more of your upcoming videos? I think that's legal, right? Assuming we both own our respective content and we're just gifting, trading fair use snippets back and forth. Let us know what you think. That's a very kind offer, and I appreciate you asking, but I do my upscaling and whatnot myself, and it just, from a financial standpoint and just from a workflow standpoint, it just doesn't make sense right now for me to contract that out to other people. I can do it myself and, get it done in the right time that I need it. And it doesn't make sense to farm that out to somebody else. So I really appreciate the offer. If I ever am in need of having someone else take over that role for me, I will certainly keep you in mind. But no, at the moment, I'm not interested in doing that. I can take care of that stuff myself. But thank you very much for the offer, and thank you for being a supporter. I really appreciate that. Brian McKinley, hello, Steve. You've said in the past that you're not interested in going to conventions, and I can understand that. I've only been to one when I was a kid, but my experience was fantastic. I met George Takei, who had spent hours signing autographs after the convention had closed in order to get every fan in line. I was at the end of that line, but George still took time to have a conversation with me instead of just running off. He was so kind and generous that it's always stayed with me and is something I've treasured. My question is, if you could meet any cast member of any Star Trek show in a social situation, would you want to? If so, who would it be? I mean, it would really depend on the specifics of the social situation. I really have no interest and even kind of have an aversion to the idea of meeting a Star Trek actor or really any like famous person who I admire in any kind of like a contrived situation. You know what I mean? Like and we move in such different circles that it's unlikely we'll ever meet each other socially in any kind of natural way. But let's just say let's say I was planning on going to the movies with a friend, and then I was, about to leave to meet my friend at the movie theater, and they texted me and said, "Oh, hey, I have another friend who wants to see the same movie. Do you mind if they join us?" And I say, "Sure, no problem. The more the merrier." And I get to the movie theater, and it turns out, wouldn't you know, it's small world, the friend of my friend is like LeVar Burton, right? Of course, in that incredibly unlikely scenario, I would love to meet a Star Trek actor or an artist or whatever whose work I have enjoyed over the years, because that's like a social situation where it's like, oh, it just so happens I know somebody who knows them and they're hanging out and I was invited too. And it's like, that's never going to happen because I don't move in those circles. But something like that, yeah, sure, that would be cool. You get to know somebody. There's a natural reason for you to meet each other and be together, and you're like kind of on an even playing field. It's not like, oh, I'm such a fan. You know what I mean? It's just, yeah, we're just two people who know the same person and we're going to see a movie. And, maybe we'll go out to eat later and we can chat because of that. And it's like something like that. Yes, of course, I'd have no problem with that. But, like meeting them at a con or, meeting them like going to one of those fucking Star Trek cruises. I have no interest in that whatsoever. I am very, very glad that you got to meet George Takei and that it was obviously a super meaningful experience for you and that George was so cool with you. Like, I think that's awesome. I don't want to diminish that experience for you at all or for anybody who has had experiences meeting people like that. And it's something that you enjoyed and it's a treasured memory. Like, I think that's great. But for me personally, it's just not my thing. I have no desire for it. I have never pursued it in any way. And it's not my thing. So, if we could meet in a social situation that was like a completely natural social situation where it's like, we're not interacting because, oh, it's a Star Trek person, yeah, theoretically that would be fine. But like I said, that's probably never going to happen. And I said LeVar Burton as an example. Meeting LeVar Burton like that would be cool. Obviously, Jonathan Frakes, is one of my favorites. But under the circumstances that I described. Ben Douglas. Hi, Steve. I read Accelerando a while back, which introduced me to the concept of a matryoshka brain. For those who are unfamiliar, a matryoshka brain is a megastructure composed of multiple nested Dyson spheres built around a star used to harness its energy for computational purposes, i.e. a massively powerful machine superintelligence. It seems to me that the ship encountering a matryoshka brain could be an interesting premise for a Star Trek episode. As you're quick to point out, however, a premise is not a story. I'm curious whether you can think of any interesting story ideas that we could get out of such a concept. Yeah, how about like the civilization that built the matryoshka brain has long since died out, meaning that the intelligence that now exists in the brain, like the gigantic artificial intelligence of the Dyson sphere, has been all alone for millennia. And by the time the Enterprise or whatever ship arrives to discover it, the Matryoshka brain has gone completely insane and is basically just like a sociopath and has the mind of a gigantic serial killer. But the crew doesn't realize that until they've already encountered it and been interacting with it for a while. And, you know, strange things have started to happen. Like, it could be like the premise for like a Star Trek horror episode, you know, where it turns out that oh my God, the giant artificial intelligence is evil and has, you know, gone completely off the deep end because it's been driven mad by loneliness, but we didn't realize it until it was too late or something like that. That's just an idea off the top of my head, but it's a really, the technological construct is fascinating and would seem to have all kinds of potential for telling all kinds of stories, but that's just the one that I came up with off the top of my head just now. But and even that is just a premise. Like, you know, that's not a story either. Like, that's just a slightly more specific idea than the one you have. But there might be some potential there. Thinking Cat, what is your opinion on how hard left some people go with the tanky pro-Stalinist stuff? As back in 2017, 2019, I was part of the Jeremy Corbyn Momentum group and was massively put off eventually when hard left authoritarians got into the servers, posting anti-Semitism and LGBTQ phobia, especially claims of degenerates and an attempt to dox me. And when I reported it, nothing was done under the claim of free speech. I can visualize the last day I used the forum. It was photoshops of people, including Tories, UK conservatives, Tony Blair, and other images of people with rainbow balaclavas being executed with "After Corbyn becomes PM" written on top. I reported it only to be told I was being a gatekeeper, and I logged off and deleted my account. Really, I'm left of center, but it's kind of scary the amount of tankies there are on Twitch with kind of crazy lots of LGBTQ community defending Stalin and his gulags, where thousands of LGBT people were worked to death. What's your opinion? I'm with you. I think I said in a video that I put up a few weeks ago that the left is not immune to authoritarianism. It seems like authoritarianism on the left is a bug rather than a feature, which is one of the reasons why I don't fear the extreme left the way I fear the extreme right. I think most leftists, no matter how far over to the left they are, most of them are people who genuinely care about other people and care about the good of society and want to create a world that would be better and more just and more prosperous for everybody, where there wouldn't be poverty and there wouldn't be, you wouldn't have to worry about going into massive debt for health care and all of these other things. Like, basic needs would be provided for people. Like, that's the world that leftists would want to create if they could create it. And if you let people on the far right institute the things they wanted and create the world they want, it would be a dystopian nightmare, like by design. It wouldn't be something that backfired or an unsavory side effect. It would be, no, that would literally be the world they wanted to create. And so you have authoritarianism on the left, but for the most part, they seem to be outliers rather than that's the whole point of the whole deal, as it is on the far right. So, but there are still authoritarian leftists, and I think we need to be aware of that, and I think we need to be willing to call it out and condemn it, just as we would call it out and condemn it from people on the right. I think we need to be clear in drawing the distinction that I just drew between the essential nature of the left versus the right and why one is clearly better than the other. But authoritarianism in any ideology is bad, So yeah, I probably would never have, participated in that forum to begin with, but if I had, I would have probably become just as disillusioned by it as you did, because I don't, I don't think mass executions of our political enemies should ever be on the docket. I think defeating them in elections. I think taking their political power from them. I think protecting people from the harmful policies they want to institute, keeping those policies from becoming law and being carried out. Yes, I mean, all of these things are very, very important. Stopping fascism is incredibly important. But I mean, salivating about, oh, when we get into power, we're going to behead all the Tories. Like, I can't follow you that far, like, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of Tony Blair, but I don't want to see the guy beheaded. Like, I'm not a huge fan of George W. Bush. I don't want to see him executed. I'm not a fan of Donald Trump. I would love to see Donald Trump go to prison. I don't necessarily want to see a public execution. I just want him to pay for his crimes, the way anybody else who had committed those crimes would have to pay for them. And I would love to see him go to prison, but, not have like a public execution. No, it's not the fucking 1700s. We're not the French Revolution, So yeah, I feel like we have a similar opinion as far as that goes. David Colby, the Christopher Pike of Star Trek fandom, no longer the Cisco, now the Pike. Interesting. Because I know the future, and it fills me with dread, but maybe unseen, there's hope after the pain. After all, the writers' strike did demand more writers in the writers' room, and maybe more writers means Strange New Worlds will suck less. A man can dream. I've been rereading my favorite series, the Vorkosigan saga by Lois McMaster Bujold, and one thing about it that I think Star Trek needs to steal, a sense of scale. The interplanetary empire that the book is about, who has enough plot to fill 15 books, is 3 planets. 3. Just 3 planets. Because get this, planets? They're big. And solar systems are bigger. The Federation doesn't need, checks Google, either 1,000 or 150 planets. But they need places for the story of the week. See my first point. Planets are big. And one planet, get this, can have multiple things on it. I don't know if sci-fi authors know this, but every single thing happening on Earth is happening on Earth. Make your settings smaller, guys. Well, I don't think that Star Trek needs to do that, but I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I mean, I never read any of the books, but I loved the TV series of The Expanse. And The Expanse takes place almost entirely in our solar system. Once they get like the Stargate things working, like they do eventually travel to other star systems and other planets, but that's not until toward the end of the series. For most of the series, most of the action is concerned with stuff that happens on Earth and Mars and in the asteroid belt, and that's pretty much it. It's not about like a massive empire of hundreds or thousands of planets. And they still manage to tell this very epic feeling sci-fi story just, within the confines of our solar system. Because you're right, space is big and planets are big, and there's lots of different people that can live on planets, and there's all kinds of different stories you can tell that can be sci-fi stories, even like adventure fiction sci-fi stories, right? Like pulp sci-fi stories that don't necessitate thousands of planets. So, I mean, you're not wrong, but I don't think there's anything wrong with the way Star Trek does it either, in theory. I mean, the reason why Star Trek got into the format of the ship visits a different planet every week is that's part of that is that's a result of the wagon train from the stars concept. And the format of Wagon Train, the TV show Wagon Train, was every episode was about something that happened to the wagon train on its route from, the beginning to the end, from the east to the west. And often it was the wagon train was stopping at a town. They would pass by a town or a fort or a settlement or something, like they were coming. It was a new place every week that the wagon train would visit. And so that's kind of what the Enterprise does in Star Trek. Every week it's a different planet, and that's just the way it is. And instead of towns and on the route west, it's planets. And I don't have a problem with that at all. I don't think they need it. You're right, they don't need it. They don't need all those different planets to tell epic sci-fi stories. They could have the Enterprise visit the same planets multiple times, and you just meet different people or encounter different situations on the same planet that we've seen before. There's nothing wrong with that. That's just not how Star Trek does it. And I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with the way Star Trek does it. It's just a different approach, maybe you could say it's less realistic, but Star Trek's not about that kind of realism. Star Trek is adventure fiction. And again, adventure fiction can be the way you describe it too. But yeah, I feel like it's just I'm kind of just going, yeah, but whatever. Like the way Star Trek does it can be good. And often is good. Like there are things about if I was trying to think like what are some problems with Star Trek that I would fix? Like that's not one of the problems I would fix. John Burns saying Kira was the best first officer was a joke. Take Babylon 5 Susan Ivanova in the first season. There's her first commander, Jeffrey Sinclair. We don't find out his secret identity until much later. Late in season 1, Jeffrey takes a powder, so I guess Susan can look to the security chief, Michael Garibaldi. Hey, where is he? Oh, shot from behind by his second in command. Guess she's on her own. Later in the series, the security chief decides to quit. Finally, after being warned if he goes to Zahadum he will die, John Sheridan goes there. Imagine Kira as a first officer without Odo and God, Benjamin Sisko. Kind of unsure what he is. Anyway, doing her job without these two dudes there to hold her hand? No. Oh, take capitalism, wine, or quark and religion out of Deep Space Nine, and you've got Voyager, a socialist atheist paradise. I'm wondering if they even had any good root beer. Can't imagine why you hate Voyager so much. It's got all the politics you love. I'm pretty sure Kira could run Deep Space Nine by herself. Like, Kira's a badass. I love Sisko. He's my favorite character. I love Odo. I love Quark. Like, I love all the characters in Deep Space Nine. But push comes to shove. I'm not saying Ivanova is not a badass on Babylon 5 because she is. But, you really think Kira couldn't run that space station without Sisko or Odo? I'm pretty sure she could. And also, take capitalism and religion out of Deep Space Nine, and you've got Voyager. No, you've still got a well-written show with clearly drawn characters and, writers that actually care about the show that they're writing. And in fact, writers that at least seem like they're watching the show that they're writing, as opposed to the writing on Voyager most of the time, where you're like, are they even watching their own show? But yeah, no. The difference between Deep Space Nine and Voyager is most of the time Deep Space Nine was good. Most of the time Voyager was, just kind of, that was fine, I guess. That wasn't the worst way to spend an hour. There are some Deep Space Nine episodes where I watch it and I think, well, that wasn't the worst way to spend an hour. But not very many. But there are quite a few Voyager episodes that are exactly like that. Michael Ridra, do you think humanity as a whole is better off or worse off with the internet? I like the internet a lot. It provides me with a lot of great stuff and easy access to knowledge, but also I feel like it has enabled disinformation on an unfathomable scale. Would so many people have been so convinced that the COVID-19 vaccine was bad without the internet? Would January 6th have happened? Would Trump have happened? Would we have developed a culture of allowing insane, hateful, ignorant POVs a seat at the table if the net hadn't normalized it? On the flip side, I might still be a conservative, convinced I'm straight if I hadn't had the internet to provide access to points of view outside of the conservative bubble I was raised in. I imagine the internet is the only escape route from indoctrination for a lot of people who would otherwise be isolated. I know a lot of LGBT plus youth are only able to get info and support they need thanks to the net. What do you think? Was the internet a real-life Pandora's box? Yeah, but remember the ending to the story of Pandora's box. The last thing to escape from the box was hope. I think in general the internet has done more good than it has done harm, and all the things you listed as good things I think are completely valid and worth pointing out. And also, like people who organize protest movements, people who want to get messages, who maybe live in authoritarian countries or live under oppressive regimes, who can reach the outside world thanks to the internet. People who can organize marches and organize protests on the internet or do on-the-ground reporting by live streaming to social media sites when there's like a crackdown or when there's something terrible happening, or like, what's going on now in Israel and Gaza, where people who are actually there who, can get access to a live streaming platform, can show what is going on in a way that is unfiltered by government or media organizations. And I think that's really, really valuable to have. And yes, there are bad things too. I mean, I always say the best thing about the internet is that anybody can say anything they want about anything. And the worst thing about the internet is that anybody can say anything they want about anything. I mean, it's two sides of the coin. It can be incredibly harmful and incredibly destructive, as you pointed out, but it can also be a very, very positive, wonderful thing. So I think maybe this is just my own personal optimism, skewing my feelings here, but I think it has done more good than harm. So I think in the long run, in total, we are better off with it than we would be without it. But that does not mean that it has not been responsible or at least has enabled some really, really, really atrocious things, because it certainly has. It certainly has. Agent Meister, who is not less perfect than Lore. Peldor Joy Steve, I never gave Daredevil much thought, but decided a few months ago to read as many of his comics as possible, and I must say that it's been a wonderful journey. I love how grounded most of his stories are, certainly compared to the rest of Marvel. The early stories from the 60s were fun. Miller's run left me breathless. I felt there was a slight dip in quality after that, but the works of Smith, Bendis, Brubaker, and Wade have been amazing. I've grown to love the character and his supporting cast, especially Foggy and Karen, whose death at the hands of Bullseye literally left me in tears. I know you said that you read the Miller run, but have you read any more DD stories? And without spoiling it, have you seen the Netflix series? I can guess your thoughts on the 2003 movie, but I didn't hate it, and I think Ben Affleck did a great job as Matt Murdock. If you haven't already, please check out Daredevil Yellow, a beautiful story from the ever-reliable Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale. Well, I have read Daredevil Yellow, and I agree with you. It's fantastic. All of Loeb and Sale's stuff was fantastic. And yeah, Daredevil Yellow was great. Other than Frank Miller's run in the early 80s, I think the only other Daredevil comics I've read are Kevin Smith's run. But it's been so long since I read it, I don't remember a whole lot about it. But I remember reading that. And yeah, I mean, obviously, yes, I've seen the Ben Affleck movie. It's not great. I don't hate it as much as a lot of people do. Like, I don't think it's one of the worst movies ever made or anything. Like, a lot of people piled a lot of hate on that movie that it didn't deserve, which is not to say I think it's a good movie, because I don't think it is. I think it's a bad movie, but it's not like, it doesn't deserve the shellacking that it has received over the years. There have been way, way, way worse superhero movies before and since. And yes, I've seen the Netflix series. I think the Netflix series is great. I still think the first season of the Daredevil Netflix series is one of the best, if not the best, TV or streaming thing that Marvel has ever done. Like, I think the first season of Daredevil was just fantastic. And the subsequent seasons were good, were not bad, but there was clearly, some slippage in quality after the first. Like, the first one was just outstanding. So yeah, I was a big fan of that. And I'm cautiously optimistic about the Disney Plus revival of it. Although the news this week about how they're basically going back to the drawing board with it and restructuring it and hiring new writers and firing the original showrunner, and like that doesn't fill me with confidence, but I'm still totally going to watch it whenever it finally, escapes. but yes, I have not read nearly as many Daredevil comics as you, but what I have read, I have enjoyed. And the Netflix show was, especially the first season, was just fantastic. General Contact Unit Problem Child. Would you agree a problem with how the O'Brien family were written is Molly's character? Basically, I think she didn't have one. Molly just constantly said generic little girl stuff like, look at my drawing, or I have a new jumper. Like in the scene where O'Brien almost hit her, she's totally oblivious to the fact that her dad is upset and just wants him to look at her picture. When I was 5, I could definitely pick up on if my dad was upset, and I have mild autism. Also, it seems like her parents mistakenly, in my opinion, believe sheltering her from negative info is entirely good. Like, in hard time, they don't tell her Miles is having issues, so she could maybe know not to hassle him, like in that scene. Also, I'll say this, DS9 is an overall better written show, but at least Voyager gave Naomi an actual personality and interests. She wanted to be the captain's assistant and liked board games with Seven. Also, they did an episode about how Neelix trying to hide the fact that her mom was in mortal danger was wrong. Well, I mean, I think Naomi was a better written character than Molly, but I mean, that's because they decided to focus more on Naomi than they ever really did Molly in Deep Space Nine. I mean, Molly really only gets one episode where she's kind of a focal point in Deep Space Nine, and that's the one where they do the time travel thing where, you know, she falls into the time portal, and when she comes back, she's older, you know, and so she's kind of a different character in that. I mean, she's still Molly, but she's not the Molly we've been following for most of the show. But other than that, she's you know, one level up from a background character. And which I think is fine. Like, I mean, I agree with you. She doesn't really have a character. She doesn't really have a lot of depth. She's mostly just there so that she can register as, oh, there's the O'Brien's kid, you know, and every once in a while she'll do something like, you know, she is pestering Miles in hard time where he's, you know, at the end of his rope, and she's serving O'Brien's story. You know, she's there so that O'Brien can lose his temper and almost hit her and then, you know, hit rock bottom and go off for the rest of his story. She's there to serve O'Brien's story, which again, I don't mind. I don't have a problem with that. I think it's fine to have characters like that. Not every character in a show needs to be a fully fleshed out three-dimensional human being. Given the way they used Molly, I think she was fine. Now, could they have used her differently? Could they have made her a more fleshed out character? Yeah. And given the quality of the writing on Deep Space Nine, generally speaking, they probably would have done an okay job with it, because the writers on Deep Space Nine, as a rule, knew what they were doing and were good at character work. And I'm sure if they had decided to focus more on Molly and give her more time and develop her character a little bit more, it probably would have been good. But they chose not to do that, which I think is fine, you know. And the writers on Voyager, especially late in the show's run, when they were running out of ideas, and they said, fuck it, let's write some episodes about Naomi Wildman's kid, or about Ensign Wildman's kid. You know, they gave her more attention, and they fleshed her out a little bit, and they gave her a relationship with Seven, and they gave her a relationship with Neelix, and most of that stuff is at least inoffensive, you know, and some of it's cute, some of it works okay, and it's fine. But did they need to do that with Molly? No. I think the way they handled Molly was fine. So, you know. But yeah, they could have done it your way, and it probably would have been good. Bina, it's deeply refreshing to see a man who cares about women's rights as passionately as you do, Steve. I was wondering about what you had said in your video, is Star Trek good at comedy, at 30 minutes, 53 seconds. Whales living at the Institute, which is like SeaWorld, only not a horrible nightmare of crass exploitation and animal cruelty. What is it about non-human animals that make you feel they deserve compassion? Is feminism only for humans, or can it be extended to female cows who are forcibly impregnated by the dairy industry? Can feminism be extended for female birds, such as hens, who are genetically modified to get their period every day, causing them bone fractures from osteoporosis? And of the female fish cut open for their caviar without any painkiller? Does it take away from human rights to care about animal rights? Would human women be treated better if our entire food system wasn't built upon violence against females? I don't know. I'm not really convinced that female animals are treated any worse because they are females than male animals are. But I agree with your general point. I mean, it's not so much that feminism is only for humans, but what feminism represents. Feminism is a human rights movement, and human rights should apply to all humans. And one of the rights that I think all humans have and should have respected is a right to kindness and to be, you know, to not be exploited and not be subjected to unnecessary pain and suffering and misery. And I see no problem with wanting those rights to be extended to animals as well. You know, I mean, even if you are even if you are someone like I personally, I'm not a vegan, but I am a vegetarian, and I for the most part do not eat meat. But if you are, even if you are not a vegetarian, if you eat meat as a matter of course, and you don't have a moral objection to that, surely we can harvest our meat and you know and kill the animals that the meat comes from, and give those animals a kind of life up until the point when they are killed for their meat that is a lot more free of misery and comfortable and humane than it is now. You know, like I really don't see how, whether you believe that it's right to harvest animals for meat or not. I mean, up to the point that they are harvested for meat, we should treat them better than we treat them, don't you think? So no, it's not a matter of, you know, should feminism be extended to animals. There's a degree of compassion and consideration that should be extended to animals, regardless of what sex they are, just out of humanity, out of compassion, out of a respect for wanting to avoid inflicting undue suffering on a living organism that can experience that suffering. You know, that's really the root of it for me, not breaking it down by gender. You know, because I mean, I would imagine, I don't know because I've never really looked into it, but I would imagine that there are particular ways in which male animals are made to suffer as well that are unnecessary and should not be done, you know? But yeah, and no, it does not take away from human rights to care about animal rights. It's not a zero-sum game. It's not it's not a finite resource. Mr. Angel W. Cabot. Hi, Steve. This is more a situation than a question. I was watching your video about how Star Trek has dealt with the topic of euthanasia. In my case, I've kind of been on both sides of the coin. I had the privilege of being by the bedside of my father his last 4 months. He was deep in coma the last 2. I don't regret a single second of that time. Gladly will do it again for a loved one, but not for me. I don't want anyone to watch me dying for 4 months. I don't want to impose that burden over anyone. And I wonder what the majority of people think about it. Well, I mean, I don't know what the majority think about it, but I'll tell you, I completely understand where you're coming from there. I mean, I always sort of assume that, like, choices I would make for myself are not choices that I should just automatically assume other people would make. And so I try not to make them for them. You know what I mean? I try to conduct my life in such a way that I am imposing on other people as little as possible. So I completely get your logic there of saying, like, you know, of course I was, you know, you call it the privilege of staying by your father's bedside in his final months. And you don't resent him for that. And you would not ever want to change that. But if you're the one in the bed, you don't want your relatives to have to do that for you. Like, that makes perfect sense to me. Because I would probably be the same way. I mean, you know, at least in terms of the thought behind it, like I can totally see myself being okay with bearing a burden that I would then not want to expect other people to bear for me. That makes perfect sense, you know? But I wonder what the majority of people think about it too. I suspect a few people in the live chat might be talking about it in a minute or so. Set Merck says, hey, Steve, I've been background watching some paranormal and cryptid investigation / reenactment shows as a way to indulge this spooky season. I was massively into unexplained phenomena when I was a kid, and I can still enjoy those things in the same way I enjoy pro wrestling. I know it's choreographed, but I can suspend disbelief enough to get a thrill out of it. This lifelong interest is also a major part of why I love the X-Files. I suspect you had a similar phase yourself in your upbringing. Is that so? Tell me about it if you would. Are there any supposed paranormal things you still think might have something to them? I did have a phase. I don't think it was as pronounced as the phase you had or the phase you are still in, perhaps. Paranormal stuff was never a big, like, particular interest of mine. But yeah, I did when I was growing up, and I was a little less skeptical than I am now. I was, like there used to be a show. I was talking about this with someone earlier. I'm a little young for In Search of, the Leonard Nimoy show. I think that was off the air by the time I was born, or at least I never watched it as a kid. I think it was more of a 70s thing than an 80s thing. I've seen episodes of it since that were like the Sci-Fi Channel used to show reruns of it. I've seen some episodes of the old classic In Search of. And I'm familiar enough with it, like to get the joke if somebody references it. And of course I used to watch, like, I remember watching Ripley's Believe It or Not, with Jack Palance hosting it. So there were shows like that I encountered as a kid that I found interesting. And then in the 90s, when I was a teenager, when the X-Files was on for a lot of its early run, Fox had a show called Sightings that was about, like, alien abductions and paranormal stuff and cryptozoology and Bigfoot and all that kind of thing. Like, that was Sightings, and it would usually come on like before the X-Files. And I would watch it and find it interesting, so I was like open to it, and I was entertained by a lot of it, but I wasn't like particularly into it. And even the X-Files, like the X-Files is one of my favorite shows ever. Like, the X-Files is way up there. When the X-Files was good, the X-Files was as good as anything that's ever been on TV for me. But it wasn't really like the fact that it dealt with the paranormal and aliens and stuff like that that might have been what got me to start watching it out of curiosity, but that wasn't what kept me watching it. Like, what made the X-Files a great show and what kept me watching it was the writing and the characters, and the quality of the storytelling. Just what a great show it was. Not that they were, chasing werewolves and vampires and aliens and stuff. Like, that was the premise of the show. And of course that was a part of the appeal, but that wasn't the main thing for me. The main thing for me was Mulder and Scully and the supporting cast and the drama and the tension and the suspense and, just what a great show it was. So, but yeah. And are there any supposed paranormal things that I think might have something to them? No. I can say this. I can make this blanket statement that I do not believe in the paranormal. I do not believe in the supernatural. I do not think there is any validity to any of it. I will add the caveat that the reason why I think that, and the reason why I feel comfortable making such a sweeping statement, is that I have never seen any evidence for anything like that. And no phenomenon in human history that I am aware of that has ever been explained has ever had a supernatural or paranormal explanation. Like, no unexplained phenomenon has ever been explained and it turned out it was ghosts or werewolves or Bigfoot or, divine intervention or a miracle or whatever like that. There are zero examples of an explained phenomenon that was due to some miraculous thing or some paranormal thing. And that to me is telling. Like, it's not 100% proof. It doesn't mean that I am absolutely, like existentially certain that there's no such thing as supernatural things or paranormal things or spiritual things or whatever. Like, I can't say that. I can't say that I know for an absolute certainty, but I can conclude with a great deal of confidence that these things don't exist, because I have never seen the slightest shred of evidence that they do. And they have never, ever, ever been the explanation for anything that has had a confirmed explanation. So no, I do not believe in that there is validity to the paranormal at all. But, as always, it's provisional. And if somebody comes up with convincing evidence of such a thing, I would be open to it. I would love to see the evidence. I would be open to be persuaded, but I've never seen that kind of evidence for anything in that category. Isaiah Taylor. So, because of recent events, I have been watching Star Trek episodes based on the concept of terrorism. I also watched YouTuber Trekspertise 2-part video essay on the topic, the aforementioned concept of terrorism. The High Ground and Ensign really talked about this crisis in depth. Question: Would the characters of Kirill Finn, Kira Nerys, or Ro Laren approve of the tactics used by Hamas? Would a bunch of Bajarans parachuting down on a Cardassian music festival and started killing be acceptable to a Bajaran freedom fighter, or the Maquis? Watching Star Trek's take on this crisis puts me at relative comfort and ease since it removes the political red tape and contradictions from our actual world. Thoughts? I don't know about the Maquis, but the Bajaran resistance, I feel like members of the Bajaran resistance would not have a problem with what Hamas did. And it makes me uncomfortable to say that because I have a problem with what Hamas did. But I do not think, I don't think Kira would have a problem with it, or at least she wouldn't have had a problem with it while she was in the resistance. And if someone asked her about it later on, I mean, because we've seen, she's had these conversations in the shows, where people much later, they've asked her to sort of answer for things that she did when she was in the resistance. And she was always very upfront and very forthright and say, look, we did a lot of things that we had to do. I might not be proud of it. I might not be proud of everything we did when we were in the resistance, but we were doing what we had to do to get the invaders off of our planet. I'm not going to apologize for anything I did because we did what we had to do. They didn't belong here. We were trying to get rid of them. This was our home. It wasn't their home. And, so I don't think Kira would have a problem with it. And I don't think Finn or Ro would have a problem with it either. And I like I said, it's an uncomfortable conclusion to come to because I have a problem with Hamas's tactics. But here's the thing. And I'm going to get into this in a couple of questions because a couple of other people asked questions about the Israel-Palestine thing. I have a bigger problem with what Israel is doing. Just as, I might say, well, I have a problem with what, if the Bajaran resistance did something analogous to, Hamas attacking that music festival, I could say oh, that was wrong of them to do that. But I would have a bigger problem with what the Cardassians were doing, just as I have, that's kind of my general feeling about the Israel-Palestine thing, especially what is going on right now, the immediate conflict that we're seeing right now, is that no, I cannot defend what Hamas did, but I certainly am not going to defend what Israel is doing right now. No, there's no defense for that, But no, I don't think the Star Trek characters you mentioned would really bat too much of an eye over what Hamas did. Brian B. Steve, a quick question about your writing process. I'm a writer and I find myself working on 2 or 3 pieces at once, usually thinking about one, writing another, and editing a third. How do you handle the writing process? Do you have a set schedule to be at the keyboard? Do you take notes about ideas or concepts? Any writing texts that you would recommend for reading about the process? I wanted to let you know that I am very appreciative of your productions and wanted to basically know what you would say is your creative philosophy. I can't really think of any books. I mean, there's texts that I read in college. I think, what's the name of the screenplay? I can't remember the author now. Sid Field. The screenplay by Sid Field. I would recommend that if you haven't read that. But that, obviously that's specifically about screenwriting. And also there's a great book that I read in my early 20s that is not focused entirely on writing. It's focused on the entire filmmaking process, but it's aimed at independent filmmakers and specifically low budget filmmakers. And it's called Feature Filmmaking at Used Car Prices. And it's by Rick Schmidt, who is a longtime independent filmmaker. And that is a great book. That was a huge influence on me. Again, it doesn't talk just about the writing process. It talks about the process of making a film all the way through. But it does talk about writing. And there are sections in it that deal with writing and dealing with limitations while you're writing and stuff like that. And that was very influential on me. And I would recommend that book to anybody. As far as my process, I'm usually only actively writing one thing at a time. Usually what I do is I like to have two videos, two like produced, edited, finished videos to release every week. So I have a video for Monday and a video for Wednesday. The Wednesday video is usually the more elaborate one, the longer one, the one that takes more effort to get done. So I write that one first because that's going to take longer and that's going to require more work. And then when I get that one done, or at least get that one to a point where it's almost done and I can kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel, then I'll switch over and write the Monday video, which is almost always shorter and less complex, and then go back and finish the script for the Wednesday one. And then I shoot on Saturday, I edit on Saturday and Sunday and Monday, and sometimes on Tuesday if the edit takes that long. But ideally, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday are writing days, and I'm writing straight through, get up at, I usually get up early in the morning. I get up, my alarm goes off at 5 a.m. I get up, I work out, I drink some coffee, maybe watch a little bit of TV. And then hopefully by 7 o'clock, I'm in front of the computer and I'm, if it's a writing day, I'm writing something, like I'm working on whatever the next thing is. So that's basically the process. I don't usually have the luxury of doing a lot of editing. Sometimes if I write something ahead of time, I'll have time to go back and edit it. I know the Starfleet jobs videos, like Starfleet lawyer, Starfleet janitor, and the one I just put up just this past week, Starfleet union rep. Those were all written well ahead of time because I got the ideas for them and I decided I knew I wanted to do them sometime soon. So I started to get ideas for them and I just went ahead and wrote them as I had time during the week while I was doing, in between other stuff. And I knew I couldn't shoot. I knew that I couldn't shoot them as soon as they were done because I needed to order costume pieces and stuff because I'd be playing a character. So I knew I had to, well, like for the Starfleet union rep, I knew like, okay, I don't have this costume. I need to get a Star Trek Enterprise, Star Trek costume. And I need to get some other things like the hats and the patches and stuff. I need to get all of these pieces that I need to play this character. So I won't be able to shoot it as soon as I'm done writing it, but I'll have it written. And then in the time between finishing the draft of the script and shooting it, I could, if I got other ideas or I wanted to go back and look something over and change something, like I did have the luxury of editing those scripts because they were done far enough ahead of time. But most of the time I don't have that luxury. Most of the time I need to make sure that it's where I want it to be during the writing process so that when it's done, it's more or less ready to shoot, once I finish the draft. So yeah, it's a very time compressed process, but a lot of my work during the week is writing, and then shooting and editing starts on Saturday and goes through to the very, very early part of the following week. Black Cover 95, who thinks the Ensign's log has been dunking on Johnson a little too much as of late. So now Hamas has attacked Israel and Israel is retaliating. I've been uncomfortable with the Israeli-Palestinian situation since my political awakening, but now I'm conflicted. On the one hand, I've learned that Israel is effectively an apartheid state, bullying Palestinians and intending to starve out the Gaza population. On the other hand, Hamas is killing innocent civilians, and their violence is often celebrated, particularly while motivated by unprogressive values. I want to see the nuance of the situation, but it comes off like both sidesism to me. I won't even get into how my family is affected by all this. In light of not knowing how to feel, is it okay for me to remain neutral on the matter? Or am I tacitly supporting evil by doing so? Well, look, if you honestly are conflicted, then no, there's nothing wrong with that. And if you really don't know how to feel or don't know what to say, there's not a thing in the world wrong with keeping your mouth shut or reserving judgment or anything like that. No, I don't think there's a problem with that at all. Look, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I don't want to say too much about it in answer to your question, not because there's anything wrong with your question, but I know there's a question coming up soon after this that also deals with this that I want to save something for. But I mean, the trouble with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is that both civilians on both sides are represented by organizations that that have not acted honorably and should not be representing large populations of people. Like, I do not think Hamas should be the organization trusted with the governance and representing the interests of the Palestinian people. And I don't think the government of Israel has proven itself to be remotely fit in carrying out the business of its state, never mind the many, many atrocities that it has committed against the Palestinian people. So in terms of the governments involved, or the state-like organizations involved, the institutions, let's just say, involved, there really aren't good guys. There are bad guys and worse guys. And the people that suffer are the civilians on both sides. And it's tough to know what to say. Because you're right. It does sound like both sidesism. If you say, well, I can't in good conscience support either government, but my heart lies with the civilians. Like, even though I feel like that's the most reasonable position, it does sound like a cop-out. It feels like, but no, you should take a side. Like, you either stand with the people who are being occupied, or you stand with the occupiers. Like, what side do you choose? And of course, if that was the choice, of course I would want to side with the people who are being occupied against the occupiers. Like, I'm on the Palestinian side. And generally speaking, I am on the Palestinian side. I do want the best for them. And I do think that Israel is acting unjustly and has for a very long time against them. But that doesn't, but I can't throw my lot in with what Hamas has done. I just can't. It's not right. And not only is it not right, I don't think it's helping the Palestinian position. I don't think it's making their future any brighter in the short term or the long term, So, but it sounds like a cop-out. It sounds like you're not, like you're trying to straddle the fence, which sucks, and which is a very uncomfortable position to be in, even if that's not actually what you mean to do. So no, I completely understand where you're coming from there. Shazy says, good evening, Steve. During family events, when it comes to interacting with family members who have anti-intellectual reactionary views, how much blame do you ascribe to them on a personal level? We know that the ruling capitalist class has consolidated large segments of the news media, and that oil oligarchs pay millions of dollars for right-wing shitheads like Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson to propagate the ideas and positions that benefit them, while marginalizing those critical of the current economic world order, including scientific consensus. What do you think? Should we attempt to reason with family members who hold those views, or just dismiss them as a lost cause at this point? If the latter, what is your strategy with dealing with such family members during family events, especially if such subjects are broached and opinions are demanded? A few questions there, actually. First, how much blame do I ascribe to them on a personal level? I hold them completely responsible. They're grown-ups. They're responsible for their opinions. If they hold a reactionary, bigoted, shitty opinion, I hold them responsible for that. Now I also hold Ben Shapiro responsible and Jordan Peterson responsible, and the people who bankroll them responsible. It doesn't let them off the hook, because they're still putting this garbage out into the world. And there's no excuse for it. And I hold them completely responsible for what they have done. But if you're a grown-up, and you are at least a reasonably educated person, if you are capable, if you have some basic level of literacy and media comprehension, and you hold these absolutely abhorrent views, you're responsible for that. And I hold you responsible for that. And you're responsible for changing it, if that is something you eventually want to do. It's not my job, to educate you or to change your mind, whether you're in my family or not. Like, As I often say, life's too fucking short. So, I mean, like, and look, it's a case-by-case basis. If you have someone in your family who you honestly think you could reach and could persuade and could pull out of that sewer, then yeah, go for it. If you think it's worth your time and effort and you might succeed, then yeah, go for it. You would know better than I would. But as a rule, I think it's a waste of time. And as a rule, my strategy for dealing with such people is to deal with them as little as possible, to not deal with them at all if I have the option. And if I were at a family event and someone demanded my opinion on something, and I was in a room full of reactionary assholes and they wanted to know what I thought, I would tell them what I thought. And then that would probably be the last time I would ever be invited to that thing, or the last time I would choose to go, because they probably wouldn't want to see me after they heard what I had to say anyway. You know, but yeah, my advice is always, look, if you think it's worthwhile, you know your family, you know your friends better than I do. If you think it's worth it to wade in and to try and argue with them and try to persuade them that they're in the wrong, and you think that'll work, or you think that'll do some good, then go for it. But as a rule, I think it's a waste of time. And I think you're better off spending your time doing other things and talking to other people, if at all possible. If you don't have to have interaction with these people, whether they're in your family or not, then don't. Life's too short. This question is from Dana. Hi, Steve. Happy Friday. At least, I hope it's been a happy Friday. I know you had a bummer earlier this week as your Orioles got knocked out of the playoffs. Do they call them that in professional baseball? Anyway, the pre-World Series. Things have been challenging for me this school year, and I could use some cheerful, wholesome content. So, of course, I look to you for that. You've been a baseball fan for as long as I've known you. What's the first time you remember realizing that you loved baseball, and what made that happen? And I just want everybody to know what a selfless question this is on the part of Dana, because Dana has absolutely no use for baseball whatsoever. Dana is the opposite of a baseball fan. So for her to invite me to talk about baseball is a very loving act, and I appreciate that. First of all, yes, they do call them the playoffs. They also call it the postseason. Usually you see the division series and the league championship series and the World Series referred to collectively as the postseason, not the playoffs, but people call them the playoffs too. Like, it's fine. Baseball is kind of like, it's similar to the story I tell whenever people ask me, like, you know, how did you get into Star Trek? It was so long ago, and it's been such an ingrained part of me for so long that I don't remember specifically. Baseball and loving baseball has been a part of my life for as long as I can remember. Dad is a baseball fan, or at least was a baseball fan when I was a kid. He doesn't really watch it anymore, but he was when I was growing up. My grandparents, Pap and Granny, were big baseball fans and watched it a lot. And so it was on, it was on TV when I was around, when other people were watching it and other people were doing things. And I just kind of got exposed to it as a result of that. And of course, there were the Suns, our local minor league team in Hagerstown. So we would occasionally go to Suns games. I remember my other grandfather, my mom's dad, not Pap, who was my dad's dad, but my mom's dad. He would you could get like little coupons from McDonald's, like McDonald's French fries. If you got like a medium or a large fry during baseball season, you could get little coupons. And if you collected enough coupons, you could get free tickets, or it was either free tickets or like a significant discount to tickets to go see the Suns, Suns home games in Hagerstown. So every once in a while, maybe once a year, me and my brother, when he came along, we would go with Pap Lashley, my mom's dad, my grandfather on my mom's side of the family. We would go with him to a Suns game. And those were the first times that I got to see like an actual live game. I actually go to see an actual live baseball game. And I remember we went to see a game we went to see an Orioles game at Memorial Stadium in 1990. So I would have been either 9 or 10, depending on exactly when the game was. But and that was cool, you know, because that was the only time I ever went to Memorial Stadium, and that was me and Mom and Dad. I think that was it. I think it was just the three of us. But we went. But that was really cool. And I've been to Camden Yards once or twice, not nearly as often as I would have liked to have gone. But you know, Camden, since they sort of phased out Memorial Stadium and the Orioles moved to Camden Yards, which is just a gorgeous ballpark. You know, I've been there once or twice to see a game, and it's just always been a part of my life. You know, I can't remember who they were playing, but I remember I was young. I was maybe 8 or 9, something like that. And I was staying over with Pap and Granny, because people who watch me regularly know this house that I live in now used to be my grandparents' house, used to be Pap and Granny's house. And I was staying over with Pap and Granny, and it was during the baseball season. And I realized that I had never watched an entire baseball game on TV from beginning to end. And I said to Granny, and the Orioles were playing that night, and I said, I want to watch the game. I want to watch the entire game, like from start to finish. And Granny said, okay. So we watched the baseball game, and we sat together in the living room, and we watched the Orioles play whoever they were playing. And it was the first time I watched like a complete baseball game from start to finish. And like I said, I don't remember anything about the game. I don't remember who the Orioles played. I don't remember if they won. I just remember that I said it in my mind. I've never watched a complete game from start to finish. I want to do that. And Granny said, okay. And we watched it. And I had a great time. It was great, you know. But that's all I remember about it, just the fact of it, just the fact that it happened. And I remember, you know, for whatever reason, Pap was a Braves fan in addition to being an Orioles fan, and I have no idea why. I used to think he was a Braves fan because back then all of the Braves games were on TBS. And so the Braves were like, you could always, if you just wanted to watch a baseball game, you could always watch a Braves game, because the Braves, all of their games were nationally televised because they were all on TBS. And I thought it was because of that, because he was a Braves fan, because he just the Braves were the team that was always on if you felt like watching baseball. But I learned at some point, he told me that he had been a Braves fan since they were in Milwaukee, since they were the Milwaukee Braves, before they were the Atlanta Braves, which would have been before Turner owned them, which would have been before all of their games were automatically broadcast on TBS. So I'm not sure why he got to be a Braves fan. I'm not sure what made him a Braves fan to begin with, but Pap was a Braves fan for as long as I knew him, in addition to also being an Orioles fan. Like the Orioles were his American League team and the Braves were his National League team. And that's I kind of adopted that. You know, the Orioles are my American League team and the Braves are my National League team. And I like the Red Sox too. I root for the Red Sox, but if it comes down to it, I'm an Orioles fan and a Braves fan. I inherited it from Pap. So, you know, but yeah, I wish I had more specific things to tell you. I wish I had like a more specific instance that I can point to and say that was the day I became a baseball fan for life. But I can't really. It's always been part of my experience. And it's always been something that I've thought was interesting and beautiful and entertaining and exciting and something I've always loved. So, you know, and thank you for the opportunity to talk about it, even though I know you hate it. Joe McClory says, was watching your Not Everything Should Be Up for Debate video and was thinking that I kind of disagree, not with the sentiment of the video title, Human Rights Should Not Be a Debate, but with the idea that it has been getting worse. I remember a time when a common movie joke was, oh, my son is a criminal, good, I was worried he was gay, or other such things. I remember a time most trans people did not know that being trans was even an option. Granted, there are places where we are backsliding, like the idea of the Jewish question being a thing that people asked openly. Seems like a new thing, but I can't help but think that even with the backlash to rights, that the conversations, at the very least, the debates are still better than they have been. It hurts to have to keep fighting the same fight, and right now with the Republicans doing all they can to distract from the fact they are letting billionaires have everything, but it still doesn't feel like it is getting worse. Am I wrong? I think it's a question of scale. And again, maybe this is my optimism biasing my opinion here, but I think in the long term, things are getting better. And things in most categories, especially in terms of like human rights and things like that, things are remarkably better today than they were 50 years ago, right? The long-term trend has been more equality, more social justice, more human rights. Like, things have gotten much better in the long term. And I think that will continue. But long-term trends can still have peaks and valleys. And I think we are definitely in a valley right now. So I think short-term, immediately, for the last few years, and perhaps for the next few years, hopefully not too much longer than that, things are at the very least not getting better, and in some cases are getting worse. And I think that's, we need to be cognizant of that, and we need to fight back. And as you say, it's exhausting to have to fight the same fight over and over again. But if that's what it comes to, that's what it comes to. But I think you're right to call it a backlash. I think you're right to call it a reaction to progress on the part of people who were opposed to that progress. And maybe those of us who were driving the progress took our hand off the wheel and, lost focus and allowed the reactionaries to drive us back, and we've lost some ground, and we need to get that ground back, and we need to push beyond it and continue to make progress. So I think that's why it feels like things are getting worse in a lot of ways, and why we are backsliding, and why we are threatened with even more regressive developments if we don't really plant our feet and push back against this. But long term, I think things have gotten better. I don't think we should use that as an excuse to take it easy and to rest on our laurels or pat ourselves on the back and say, yeah, see, things have, oh boy, if you look at the long-term trend, things are so much better than they were, so we can all just relax. Like, no, certainly we can't relax. We should not relax. We should keep fighting. But yes, I think on the long term, things have gotten better. But in the short term, I think certainly for particular groups, things are getting worse, and we need to stop that and get back on track. Siamak, who is getting back to his late ways. Steve, I hope you're well. Well, it is a terrible time for everyone. The Republicans are eating themselves. I just wish they'd find the end instead of being some evil Ouroboros. The Middle East is, wow, it's terrible. And things are such that you can't express sympathy for civilians on both sides without getting screamed at as either an anti-Semite or a Zionist. Also, feeling for friends in Israel and Palestine who are hearing the bombs. Reminds me of being a kid and calling Iran after an Iraqi air raid to see if my grandparents were still alive. Never wished that on anyone else. And I didn't think I'd have that feeling again. Regardless, all my thoughts are with the Israelis and Palestinians just caught up in this thing. No question, just sharing. I'm sure others will as well. Yeah, it's, and that's what I said in response to the earlier question. Like, my concern is with the people that are, as you say, are caught up in it. I was thinking about it earlier, and I came up with a very imperfect analogy, but I feel like it expresses my general feeling specifically about what the IDF is doing. Because the excuse is whenever this time in particular, and in the past as well, whenever Hamas or some other Palestinian group has inflicted some attack on Israel, launched rockets or done some other kind of terrorist attack, Israel has always responded with overwhelming force, like disproportionate force, in my opinion. Like they've gone way overboard, where it's not just about finding the people responsible or whatever. It's like punishing Palestine and everybody in it for what was done to Israel, right? And the excuse for attacking civilian targets recently has been, well, Hamas has integrated itself into the civilian structure. They're using civilians to hide behind, right? So imagine that. Let's say a gang of bank robbers robs a bank, and they're in the bank, and they're holed up in the bank, and there's a standoff with the police. The police are outside, the gang of bank robbers is inside, and they have taken hostages from the bank. So the police go into the bank, and they kill all the hostages, and then they arrest the bank robbers. Now, I don't think anybody would say that that was okay. And if the police were questioned on this, and they said, well, it's unfortunate that we had to kill all of those innocent hostages, but it's not our fault. The bank robbers were using those hostages as shields. And if we had not killed those hostages, we wouldn't have been able to catch the bank robbers. So it was really out of our hands. I don't think we would accept that as an excuse, would we? Yeah, you want to catch the bank robbers. Sure, catching the bank robbers is important. Yeah, you don't want to create an environment where people feel empowered to just rob banks willy-nilly because they know that we'll just let them get away with it. But the bank robbers robbing the bank doesn't give the authorities the right to murder the people that they took hostage just to catch them. And by the same token, Hamas using civilians in Gaza to hide behind doesn't give the Israeli army the right to kill those civilians to get to Hamas. I'm sorry, I just don't think it does. It's terrible what happened at that music festival. What was done to those people was unconscionable. The fact that Hamas took hostages is unconscionable. It's terrible. It's inexcusable. I don't want to make an excuse for it. But just because you were the victim of a terrorist attack, that does not give you the right to commit war crimes in retaliation. And what Israel is doing, what the Israeli army is doing, what the Israeli government is doing, is so far beyond the realm of a reasonable, measured response that it's ridiculous. Like they gave 1 million people in northern Gaza 24 hours to move to the south. Now, that in and of itself is an absurd order, because it's virtually impossible for, even under good conditions, it's virtually impossible for 1 million people in that small of an area to evacuate safely and go to an even smaller area. That's where they're expected to go in that short of a time. And it's complicated by the fact that there aren't good routes. It's virtually impossible to move freely through that region now because of all the bombing that's been done and because of all the fighting and all the violence. The civilians that have been told, hey, heads up, we're going to start just bombing everything in sight tomorrow. So, you'd better all be out of there by tomorrow. They can't get out. There's nowhere for them to go. There's no way for them to get to where they theoretically are supposed to go. And there's no room for them in the place where they're theoretically supposed to go. So it's a completely absurd order. And it is, a lot of people fear, the preamble to an absolutely horrifying atrocity that is about to happen. And there is no excuse for it. What Hamas did to provoke it is not an excuse for what Israel is doing now, nor for what it is about to do. There's just no excuse for that. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. yeah. Like I said earlier, bad guys versus worse guys. I'm not apologizing for Hamas. I'm not justifying anything that they did. I'm not painting them as the good guys here. But what the IDF has done is so much worse than the absolutely evil thing that Hamas did. What Hamas did was awful, was terrible, was inexcusable. What the IDF is doing is worse and will affect a much larger group of people for a much longer period of time. It's inexcusable. And it should be condemned by every, government and institution and international organization on the planet. It should not be allowed. It should not be accepted. The fact that you were attacked is awful. It does not give you the right to do what you're going to do. So anyway, just sharing, like he says, CMAC, just sharing my opinion. Okay, and the last question. This one is from Russell. Good afternoon, Steve. Yes, you are right. I can't wait to get into this. It was suggested last Q&A that I had to rely on fiction to prove a point, even though NYPD Blue stories, not characters, come from the experience of real-life former detective Bill Clark. I will speak of fact. After your Patreon hangout, some teenager had threatened a man who retaliated by threatening to shoot them. He was visited later by a social worker doing a welfare mental health check on the said person, and the social worker for his troubles was shot. This social worker was unarmed. A situation that wouldn't have happened had police interviewed this guy. Certain people are under the illusion that criminal behavior doesn't exist. And let me be clear, when a cop commits a crime via prejudice, sexual or abuse of power, he or she is a criminal and should be dealt with in the same manner as all criminals. I don't think all cops are bad people. I take offense to that notion. We need police. That is my opinion. Okay, so just to zero in on your example there of the social worker who was killed during a mental health check, right? I mean, that's awful. That's terrible. I would never ever want that to happen. But if you're, I guess my question is, if you're sending a social worker to check up on someone, why does it make sense to send a cop instead? Like, if you're sending a social worker, then clearly there is some requirement for the skills that social worker has in that situation. So why would it make sense to send a cop who presumably does not have the same training that the social worker has? I don't get why that would, I mean, you can say like, well, but the social worker wouldn't have, like the social worker wouldn't have gotten shot. Yes. If the social worker wasn't there, they wouldn't have been shot. You're right. But what good would have been accomplished for the person they were doing the welfare check on? Like, what good does it do to send a cop who is not trained in mental health and social work to do that sort of thing? And this is the kind of thing that a lot of people who support defunding the police, this is the point that they have tried to make over and over again, and they constantly get shouted down by people who are like, police are the thin blue line between order and chaos and blah, 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 blah. A lot of what proposals to defund police departments are trying to accomplish is shifting the burden of doing mental health checks, for example, away from police and onto new or other agencies that are actually qualified to do it. Like, if you want to do a mental health check on a person, why would you send an armed cop who is not qualified in psychology or social work or anything like that? Like, that's not a cop's job. It shouldn't be a cop's job. And as far as the person being armed, a person who has a mental health issue so serious that the government is sending a social worker to check on them shouldn't have a fucking gun in the house to begin with. That's a part of a separate problem that we have in this country, where everybody has too many fucking guns, period. Like, the gun problem is a separate issue that is related to the police issue and is related to the crime issue, but it's its own thing. Like, we have too many fucking guns in this country. Too many people have them. It's too easy to get one, and we're too fucking stubborn and reluctant to get rid of them. So that's a gun problem. And the social worker getting shot is an awful, awful thing. But I don't see how that situation, like, unless you know ahead of time that the social worker, if you can see into the future, like, oh no, the social worker is going to get shot if we send them there. Okay, then don't send the social worker. But all things being equal, not being able to see into the future, why do you send a cop to do a mental health check on someone when you have a social worker that you could send? The social worker is qualified for that job. The cop isn't. You know, I mean, I don't think all cops are bad people either. But I think the system that they work in is incredibly broken and needs to be fixed. And I don't think we fix it by making excuses for cops. I'm sorry, I don't. And I love NYPD Blue. NYPD Blue is one of my favorite shows. Homicide: Life on the Street is another one of my favorite shows. Some of my favorite shows are cop shows. But we have serious, serious problems with policing in this country. And I don't think it gets fixed by apologizing for or making excuses for cops, either as individuals or as institutions. I don't think that's the way forward. I don't think that's productive. So, anyway, that's my opinion. And thank you very much for your question. All right, that is it for the pre-submitted patron and member questions. I'm going to turn my attention to the live chat in just a minute. But first, I have a brand new Stuffy and Friends short to premiere for all of you. This will, of course, go up as a standalone YouTube short on my channel tomorrow, but you get to watch the world premiere right here tonight. So please enjoy this, the newest Stuffy and Friends short.
Why do they call them cowboys when they ride horses and they're fully grown? Ought to call them horsemen.
What are you watching?
An old Gallagher special.
How come they call the big ones telescopes too? They don't get no longer.
When does he start smashing things with the big hammer?
Not until like the last 20 minutes. He needs to get through the topical stuff first.
Why is it the orange is the only fruit named after what color it is? They should name all the fruits like that. Instead of a banana, ought to call it a long yellow.
Didn't his act turn kind of racist toward the end of his life?
Yeah, but this one is too early for that.
Why did Japan, Korea, and Vietnam insist on pretending to be 3 different countries? Don't they know that just confuses people?
Well, I'll leave you to it. Enjoy the melon smashing.
I will.
Why do they say get in a car, but get on a bus? Isn't that dumb?
He really was the thinking man's prop comic. Sometimes you just feel like making fun of Gallagher, I guess. Anyway, hope everybody enjoyed that. All right, let me go back and see if I missed any super chats. I didn't. There's just the most recent one from John Burns. John Burns says, it's not being condemned by the Democratic Party, and don't say some are in response. Biden isn't, and he isn't condemning many in the Middle East. No, yeah, but the Democrats are almost... I mean, as a party, the Democrats are very pro-Israel, and I understand why, but I wish that, just like a couple people in the in the pre-submitted questions, I wish that there was room for nuance. I wish that that whole conversation had not been so poisoned by anti-Semitism that people were afraid to make legitimate criticisms of the actions of the government of Israel. But I think that is the situation. And to a certain extent, it's a reasonable concern because there are anti-Semites who will pounce on every criticism of Israel, however valid, and use that to further their narrative. And that is I don't blame people for being careful about that because God knows I would never want to be viewed as aligned with an anti-Semite or an anti-Semitic organization. And there is a lot of energy spent co-opting every criticism of Israel to make it serve an anti-Semitic narrative. And that is fucking abominable. And I would not want to be a part of that. And I think you need to be careful of that. But at the same time, you can't allow, you can't just let the government of Israel do whatever it wants. And murder civilians and commit war crimes. It's just not, it should not be okay. And yes, there are some individual Democrats who have condemned it and have called on the president to, at least be a little more even-handed in his statements about this. But no, as a party, the Democrats are fairly, lockstep behind We Stand with Israel, which is not productive. Flexible Nerd says, all I know about Gallagher was he smashed watermelons. That's the main thing you need to know. That's the main thing. 255 AD says, as an addendum to my question from earlier, do you agree it's wrong to shelter little kids from bad news? Like, would you tell a 5-year-old their parent experienced a trauma? I think I don't think you should hide things like that from kids. I think you need to find a way of informing them that they will be able to understand and that won't just end up, unnecessarily upsetting them. But no, I think it's the responsible thing to try and keep your kids informed of important things like that, especially if it's going to affect life in the home, like the O'Brien thing did. John Burns with another super chat says, why, quoting Stuffy, why do you have $21 bills in your wallet? And the real answer is for that bit. 255 AG says, I read a book where the human race have to move to the South Pole and they create a servant race of ice-adapted beings that rebel against us. Is that trope overused? Not necessarily. It depends on what it's used for, but no, clearly some of us still need to get the message, the idea that humans are always ready, willing, and able to subjugate some other group in order to serve our interests or make our lives more convenient. That is an impulse that apparently we keep needing to remind ourselves is bad, so I don't have a problem with that. Steve Schmeling says, I forgot to mention last time about the Klingon language. I like to believe when they said they needed a language, Doohan started choking on a bagel. I love that. And that's why it sounds that way. That's perfect. I love that. 255 AD says, my grandfather turned 90 today. Do you ever imagine what the world will be like when you're an old man? He once told me, I used to wonder about 2000. Now it's years past. I don't really. I really don't. At least not like, I don't try to come up with anything specific. I wonder if we'll have flying cars by then. I don't really wonder about it all that much. No, I guess I'm just not curious in that way. I hope I live that long and I hope I get to see it. I'm curious in that way. I do have a very strong feeling in me of, I want to see what happens next, but I don't have any specific ideas of what that might be. Darylette says, okay, Steve, what is your favorite beginning to end Billy Joel album? I'm partial to the Nylon Curtain. I would say probably the Nylon Curtain is my favorite. It's such a great album, but I also really like, Turnstiles a lot. Turnstiles has some great stuff on it. And come on, how can you vote against The Stranger? I know that The Stranger is kind of an easy answer because that was his bestseller, and there's a ton of really familiar songs on there. So I love The Stranger too. But yeah, I'm probably with you. I'd probably say the Nylon Curtain is my favorite, top to bottom. Yeah. Or I'll tell you what, if we're expanding it beyond studio albums, Songs in the Attic. Songs in the Attic. 225 AD says, I walked past this ancient glass box with what looked like some kind of primitive communication device inside on the street. You're older than me. Any idea what it was used for? Yeah, it was used for, what you would do is you would get into that box and you would close the door so that people walking past couldn't hear you. And then there was a thing in there that back then we called them phones. Now I know nowadays phones look like this, right? This is a phone and you just keep it in your pocket. But back then, phones were bigger and they had to be attached to things with wires. And what you would do is you would go into that booth, we called them booth, and you would close it and you would get out coins. And coins were a form of physical money. And they, were assigned a particular value based on their size and whatever. And you would insert the appropriate number of coins in order to pay for the phone call that you were going to make. And then you would hold the phone to your ear and you would dial the phone number of the person you were calling, and you would have a conversation with them on the phone. And that way, nobody walking past you on the street could hear what you were talking about. You'd have privacy. And we called that a phone booth. So yeah, that's a little piece of history you walked by there. It's a little, it's a, like a fossil still out there in the wild somewhere. S. Aiken says, Steve, that Union Rep Star Trek video was one of the greats. Going to use it with my middle school students to explain Union. Oh, wow. That's really cool. Do so with my blessing. That's wonderful. Yeah, I love that idea. I'm glad you liked the video. I'm happy with how that one came out as well. Daryl, yeah, Songs in the Attic, Say Goodbye to Hollywood. Oh God, that one has the most famous version of Say Goodbye to Hollywood. It has doesn't it have Summer Highland Falls? Is Summer Highland Falls on Songs in the Attic? I think it is. My favorite version of I've Loved These Days. Oh, I've Loved These Days. Such a great song. What else? What's the other great song on Songs in the Attic? Oh, I'm going to have to look up Songs in the Attic now. It's been so long since I listened to it. I can't remember all the tracks on it. Miami 2017. Oh, what a great song. Miami 2017. That's what I was trying to think of. Captain Jack. The live version of Captain Jack on Songs in the Attic is so goddamn good. Yeah, Songs in the Attic is a great album. Oh, yes, you can also call collect, as Geek points out. Yes, the Random Geek says Fred Rogers always believed that kids are more aware than we give them credit for. Yeah, as gentle as Mr. Rogers was never really an advocate for lying to kids or keeping kids in the dark about important things. He felt very strongly that kids, you needed to speak to kids at their level so they could understand, but that they deserved to be informed about things and to know when important things were going on and to not be sheltered from things, just because you were worried that it would upset them. Oh, and Homebody, yes, I love Pluto. Homebody says, just to let people know, for those with low funds, Pluto is free and streams TOS, TNG, DS9, and Voyager on a rotating basis with an occasional lower decks. Yeah, and not just Star. I mean, there are tons of Pluto channels, and they're free with ads. And yeah, Pluto is great. I have Pluto. I have the Pluto app on my TV, and sometimes if I'm just looking to watch something and I don't care what it is, I'll put on, the Pluto Unsolved Mysteries channel and just watch a bunch of Unsolved Mysteries episodes, or the Pluto Baywatch channel, or one of the Pluto Star Trek channels, or This Old House has a channel, or Mystery Science Theater. I watch a lot. Usually when I click on the app, it's usually already on the Mystery Science Theater channel, because that's the one I watch the most often. It's just, episode after episode after episode of Mystery Science Theater. It's a little slice of heaven. Yeah, Pluto TV is awesome. I highly recommend it. Sir Random Geek says, do you remember In the Year 2000 skits from Conan O'Brien? Yes, I love those. And I remember that specific one as well. Vegetarian ends when plants learn to scream. I remember that one. Here's a super chat from Kirek 2011. Hey, Steve, give me time. I'm going to comment on your tapestry video, which is one of my personal favorites. Not the best of TNG, mind you, but I love it. Well, I look forward to that. Because, it's one of my favorites. It's one of my very favorite videos, or one of my very favorite episodes. Yes, and Tubi as well. Yes, Geek. Yeah, Tubi is good too. Kane 20C says, okay, deathmatch time. Billy the Piano Man Joel versus Bruce the Boss Springsteen. This is a cruel one. This is a cruel one. I would have to go with Springsteen, but it would break my heart because I love Billy Joel. And I've loved Billy Joel for longer than I've loved Springsteen. I discovered Billy Joel and came to know his music and love it as a younger person. I didn't really get into Springsteen until I was a teenager. But just purely on the quality of the music, I got to go with Springsteen. But it gives me no joy. It gives me no joy because I love Billy Joel. 255 AD says, there was something that bugged me a little about your video. Even if Earth still had money in 2150, doesn't it have to be the case everyone gets paid enough if no poverty? Everybody may get paid enough, but they may not. They may get paid enough to not live in poverty, but they don't necessarily get paid enough to be compensated in a way that they believe is fair for the job they do. Dana asks, did you ever call someone and leave a message super fast when it asked your name? No, I never did that, but I remember when people did that. Yes, I remember when people did that. Did you do that with your parents when you were at college? Did you call them, and when they said, who is this call from, you would just say something really fast so your parents would get the message? I feel like you told me you did that once or twice back in the day, but no, I never actually did that, but I remember very much that used to be a thing. Oh, Knit and Crochet Tiger with another history lesson here. Don't forget, there was once a circular piece on the front of the phone that had 10 holes for each digit of the number. You stick your finger in that hole and rotate it clockwise to dial. Yes, indeed. And then you had to wait for it to come all the way back around. Absolutely. Yeah. For a time there was like a very long transitional period where a lot of people had the rotary phone and a lot of people had the push button phone, but not everybody had the push button phone. So if you would see a commercial on TV for like a phone number and it was, like the psychic hotline or something, they would say, a touch tone phone required. Cause you couldn't, when you called the number and the automated, menu said press 1 to talk to Miss Cleo. Like you couldn't just dial the 1 on the rotary phone. That didn't work. It didn't count. It couldn't tell. You had to have the push button phone to do that. 255 AD says, do you think it would have been better to make a vid about an Earth Cargo Union rep, even though they're paid enough for the working conditions? Even though they're paid enough, the working conditions are pretty rough, kind of like oil rig workers. Yeah, but Starfleet Union rep is a better title. and fits more in line with the previous videos, like doing unseen or sort of inferred or implied jobs from Star Trek shows that we never actually see or we rarely see, but which would have to exist. Or if they existed, allow me to, make jokes and comment about stuff. So Starfleet Union rep. John Burns with a super chat. Billy Joel, Stormfront. Leningrad is beautiful. 100%. Leningrad is a beautiful song, and Stormfront is a great album. Absolutely. Pluto is not available in your location. Oh, I'm so sorry. That sucks. Steve, those are great Billy Joel songs. I love Miami 2017. Always a Woman is a great song, and Downeaster Light. Those are great songs. You almost can't go wrong with Billy Joel. Oh, I forgot to put the live chat up on the screen. Thank you, Steve. What a fool I've been. There you go. Hi, Isaiah. Isaiah says, I'm just buying all my Star Trek stuff on DVD and VHS. Well, that way you've got it. It doesn't matter if they take it off a streaming service. Yes, Ethan, I'm talking about Billy Joel because other people in the chat wanted to talk about Billy Joel, and I'm very happy to talk about Billy Joel. Jimmy Burley says, did you ever get into Doctor Who? Not really. I remember watching the older version on PBS when I was younger. They would show Doctor Who episodes, like classic Doctor Who episodes, on public television, like late at night on the weekends. So I watched some of the Tom Baker ones, and then for the newer ones, for the revival, I saw the first season, the Christopher Eccleston season, and thought that was good. And I've seen maybe half of the first David Tennant season, but that's all I've seen. I liked it. What I've seen of it, I've liked, but I just never got super into it. I didn't like it to the point where I was like, oh, I have to watch all of this. I have to devour this, So, I mean, I don't dislike it. It seems like a good show, but I just haven't seen most of it. See you, Mac. That's brilliant. You use it to call for a ride at the movies. That's great. Oh, that's great. S. Aiken with a super chat on unions. Thoughts on teachers' unions, pros, cons. I'm a huge fan of teachers' unions. I think teachers' unions are great. I mean, I'm sure there are cons, just as there are always cons for unions. There are always, things that they don't do well or they don't do perfectly, or certain problems that maybe they make a little more complicated, but the pros always outweigh the cons. I mean, unions are always on balance a good thing. I do not understand I understand it from a purely capitalistic political point of view, but from a moral point of view and a practical point of view, I don't understand why there was ever a distinction drawn between private employees and public sector employees. I think all workers have a right to unionize and should unionize for their own good. So yeah, I'm a big fan of teachers' unions. The only unions I'm not a fan of are police unions. And I think I did a video about that a while back, because police unions don't actually function the way other labor unions do. And police unions are functionally not really a part of the organized labor movement. So, police unions are really unions in name only, and they're the only unions I'm not a fan of. All other labor unions I am a big fan of. And I wish there were more of them, and I wish more workers were members. Kane 20C, thoughts about Prodigy season 2 and the Netflix deal. I think it's great. I mean, it's nothing other than what I expected. Like I never expected that the show was just going to disappear. I think Paramount made it clear when they took it off Paramount Plus that they were shopping it around. And I never had any doubt that it was going to end up somewhere. I didn't know if it was necessarily going to be Netflix or not, but I knew it was going to wind up somewhere. And I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled. Hopefully because it's on Netflix, and Netflix has a bigger subscriber base than Paramount Plus has. Hopefully more people will see it who haven't seen it, and it'll become more popular. And then at some point next year we get new episodes. We get season 2, which is awesome. I'm very happy. I love Prodigy. It's become, I think, my second favorite of the currently in production Star Trek shows. The only current Star Trek show that has been more consistently good is Strange New Worlds. And Prodigy's been fantastic. And again, I love Discovery. I'm a fan of Discovery, but Discovery is very inconsistent. Discovery has some pretty severe ups and downs in terms of quality. But Prodigy, once Prodigy got over, the first couple of episodes were a little bumpy, but once it hit that stride, man, it just kept going. Like Prodigy that first season of Prodigy was outstanding, was just outstanding. So I'm very happy that it has landed somewhere, and that we'll be able to watch season 1 again when it goes up on Netflix, and then we'll get season 2. That, I think it's awesome. Ethan Horn asks, who is my favorite Poirot actor? Honestly, I have not seen as many different versions of Poirot as I have seen of Holmes. So the only Poirot actors I've ever seen are David Suchet from the show, from the Agatha Christie's Poirot that Dana and I watch every other week on Trek Reluctantly. The one that most people know, the one that most people's default Poirot. and Brana from the more recent movies, and then Albert Finney from the Murder on the Orient Express movie from the 70s. And of those, I would have to say it's David Suchet. I think he's fantastic. I mean, I think he's terrific. So he would be my favorite. But like I said, I haven't seen nearly as many of those as I have seen of Sherlock Holmes actors. Here's a super chat from Kirak 2011. He says, my political disagreement is at its end, by the way. You know my position. Anyways, with your permission, I want to get back to my Star Trek Q&A. So many questions, which you can disagree with. And then another one just came in from Kirak, following up on that, says, my Star Trek question for the day, just because I can't wait, and I promise I will give you my full thoughts in your video. Do you believe that was Q or a product of Picard's imagination? Oh, in Tapestry. I think it was really Q. Yeah, I mean, I know the ending kind of has Picard, when he talks to Riker about it, he says, well, you know, maybe it was all a dream. Maybe it was Riker says, well, maybe it was a near-death experience, but most people's near-death experiences aren't that vivid. And, you know, so there's a little bit of doubt thrown in. It's like, well, maybe it wasn't Q. No, I think it was Q. I think it was Q doing that. And yeah, I mean, you can ask. I mean, look, I appreciate the super chats, and I appreciate your generosity. But I mean, you can ask me questions about pretty much anything you want. Like, you don't need to ask my permission before you certainly don't need to ask my permission before you ask a Star Trek question. You can ask all of those you want. But yeah, I think it was Q. Steve Schmaling says police unions just make it easier for cops to circle the wagons and protect shit cops that belong in jail. Yeah, and make it difficult to accomplish necessary institutional reform as well. Yeah, they're just yeah, I don't support police unions at all. Let me see here. Oh, Ethan, yeah, I've heard that that Peter Ustinov as Poirot is great, but I haven't seen that one. Sweet Candy Boy says, speaking of unions and workers' rights, what the fuck is this push for me to embrace company culture? I'm here to receive a paycheck so I can buy food and sustain shelter to survive. I mean, I think that kind of thing is an effort to create kind of an artificial solidarity so that if they do pay you less, like, you won't mind as much because you'll be part of the team and part of the family. It's just a con. It's smoke they're blowing up your ass so that you'll be okay if they don't pay you as much as you think you're worth. That's what it is. You know. Steve Smelling asks, favorite Bond actor and Bond villain. Again, not really a huge James Bond fan. The movies weren't that great, but just as a James Bond actor, I thought Timothy Dalton was great. But I mean, Sean Connery, to me, was the best James Bond. But again, I haven't seen all of them, and I'm not really an expert on it. I'm not really like a particular big fan of it. And I don't really know, I guess, Goldfinger as a villain. And there was one that I wanted to make sure that I got. Vitor Martin says, is that Batman behind you? Yes, it is. Actually, it's Batman and also Catwoman. And they came as a set. So it's a 10-inch Batman and a 10-inch Catwoman. And that's actually the second pair of those that I have owned in my life. When they first came out in the 90s, and like 1990, the mid to late 90s, I think. And I got the set. I got those two. And then when I moved out of my parents' house and moved into my own apartment for the first time, I didn't take them with me, and they got lost. Like, I don't know if my dad was cleaning out the house after I left and threw them away, or they got packed away in an attic and disappeared or whatever, but I didn't have them anymore. So a few years ago, I remembered them, and I thought, I want those again. Like, I want that Batman and Catwoman that I used to have. So I found I found a set that was being sold on eBay, unopened, like still in the box. And I got it. And there they are. So, yeah. Let me see here. Some more super chats coming in. Thank you, everybody. This is a good one from Boxy Brown, a member question. Did you watch the new Frasier? And also a super chat from Boxy. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Yes, I have watched the first 2 episodes of the new Frasier that have been released. It was okay. I thought the second episode was a lot better than the first. The second episode had some bits in it that made me laugh. So far it has not been up to the standard of the original Frasier, but that's a really high bar. Like the original Frasier, when it was really firing on all cylinders, like the Frasier was one of the best sitcoms ever. So I don't really expect this new version to reach that level, but so far it's been all right. And like I said, the second episode was better than the first and was funny. I laughed a few times and generally enjoyed myself. So I'll probably watch the rest of it. And another super chat from Kirak, who says, okay, fair enough. I know your viewpoint on Voyager, but I have to admit, many episodes are meant to be day to day without consequence. I was watching Unforgettable, and I have to admit, I really like it. Well, I like a lot of Voyager episodes. I don't hate every single episode. A lot of Voyager episodes are really good. My issue with Voyager and being so episodic, because a lot of people will bring up TNG, right? They'll say like, well, TNG was really episodic too, and you like TNG, but you don't like Voyager, so what gives? And one of the big differences for me between TNG and Voyager, because I think that's a fair thing to point out. TNG was very episodic and had some long-term character development, but not much. But the difference between TNG and Voyager is that by the time you got to about season 3 of TNG, those characters were all very clearly drawn. You knew who all of those people were. They didn't change much over the course of the series. They didn't grow much over the course of the series. The experiences they had in one particular episode usually didn't stick and carry through to future episodes, like, for instance, they did more often than not on Deep Space Nine. But, like, you knew who Riker was. You knew who Dr. Crusher was. You knew who Geordi was. You knew who Data was. You knew who Captain Picard was. You had a sense of who they were as people. I didn't really get that on Voyager, with a few exceptions. I felt like I knew the Doctor. I felt like I had a good grasp of the Doctor's character. I felt like I had a good grasp of Seven of Nine's character when she got there. But for the most part, the characters on Voyager were just vague. It was just tough to know who anybody was. And I think the show suffered for that. And I think its episodic nature was the worst for that, because it's one thing to say, okay, we're going to show you this episode and it's going to be a standalone episode and that's just the way the show is, and what happens on the episode isn't really going to matter by next week. Okay, that's fine. But it's not as fine if I don't even really have a sense of who these people are, you know? And same thing with TOS. Yeah, Kirak has another super chat, says TOS is very episodic. What's the difference there? I would make a similar argument. That the characters in TOS, at least the main characters, the big 3, I think you can make an argument that the supporting cast on TOS are not very well drawn, that Chekhov and Sulu and Uhura and even Scotty to a certain extent are not incredibly well drawn characters, but Kirk, Spock, and McCoy are, and they're usually the center of attention. So it gets away with it, for that. And Unforgettable. I don't know if I remember that episode or not. Knit and Crochet Tiger. Yeah, I bet Catwoman does love Batman being 10 inches. I bet she does. Steve Schmeling says, your thoughts on this crossover, Batman versus the Punisher. Was that when Azrael was Batman? I remember a Batman Punisher crossover, or am I thinking of a different one? I can't remember. I remember reading a Batman Punisher crossover comic in the 90s, but I can't remember a lot of specifics about it. I remember thinking it wasn't terrible, but I don't remember a lot of specifics about it. Yes, Boxy, the air hockey table bit on Frasier was funny. I did enjoy that. And Brian, that's a good point too. That Frasier is in the older parent role. Frasier is in the Martin role, and his son's personality is more like Martin, but their relationship dynamic has switched where, now the Martin character is the son, and Frasier is himself as the father, and he's sort of in the Martin role. Yeah, I do think that is. I do think that there's a lot of potential there, and so far it has worked well. CMX says TNG and Voyager had different premises. Voyager had one and they ignored it, but they had. Yeah, that's the other thing. That's the other thing that hurt Voyager, and that's a really good point. The fact that Voyager was set up to have an ongoing premise that it just never really did anything with. That I feel like that harmed it as well. Like it was in the bones of the show to have ongoing storylines, because of the nature of the show and the situation, the predicament of the characters would seem to not only lend itself, but seem to positively suggest, that it not be as rigidly episodic. And yet it was. 255 AD says, when I went to my grandfather's birthday party, I left almost right away because my cousins were there. It must have come across like I killed someone and needed to hide the body. Now, here's my question. When you left the party, did you say goodbye before you left, or did you just leave? Because I think I've said many times before, my favorite part of I don't really like parties as a rule. I don't really go to parties as a rule. My favorite part of going to a party is just peacing out without telling anybody. Just leaving without saying, I will leave a party and not say goodbye to a single person. And I love doing that. God damn it. God damn it, I love doing that. It's almost worth going to a party to just hang around for an hour and then quietly leave without telling anybody. Oh, I love it. Oh, I love it so much. Boxy Brown, who are the big three? In the original Star Trek, the big three are Captain Kirk, Spock, and Dr. McCoy. Yeah, James, exactly. James Ashenhurst describes it pretty well here. In TOS or TNG, when X happens, Kirk will do Y and Picard will do Z. On Voyager, when X happens, Janeway is going to do * plus J to the third power divided by 7. Exactly. And here's the thing. You don't necessarily, it's not that that Kirk will do Y, but Kirk well enough to know that he'll probably do Y. Like you can have an expectation of what Kirk will do. And then maybe he'll fulfill that expectation, or maybe he will act in an unexpected way. But the point is, his character has been established strongly enough that you at least have some expectation, right? And it's really difficult to have that for Voyager characters, for most of them. For some of them, you can kind of have it. But for most of the Voyager characters, it's like, I don't have any idea. Yeah, you're right. What would Janeway do in this situation? I don't know. Sometimes she's like the most by-the-book captain ever. And other times she's like she would just set the whole thing on fire. You know what I mean? Like she's so inconsistently written. Boxy Brown asked, when is the last time you went to a party? It's been years. Pre-pandemic. It's been years. CMAC, but see, that's why it's so much fun. Etiquette demands you say goodbye to the host of a party, and I don't. That's what makes it so much fun. It's like, it's transgressive, but in a harmless way. I get to feel like a rebel without actually doing anything rebellious. It's great. It's great. Oh, Flexible Nerd, that's easy. Flexible Nerd says, who is the best captain who isn't Kirk or Picard? Cisco. Well, okay. It depends on how you're approaching the question. If I'm looking at it just as a person in the audience of the TV show, just based on how much I like the characters and how well written I think the characters are, et cetera, it's Cisco. And I think I prefer Sisko to both Kirk and Picard. I think Sisko is my favorite captain. But if you look at it from the perspective of who is the captain who I would most want to serve under, other than Kirk or Picard, I would say Captain Pike from Strange New Worlds. And again, I would say I would probably rather be serving on his ship than either Kirk or Picard's. I think he is the ideal starship captain. I think Pike, as seen on Strange New Worlds, is the model of what a starship captain should be. Yeah, and Steve, yeah, I think so. I think Kirk could have taken out the Borg pretty easy. I don't think Kirk would have been assimilated. I think they would have kidnapped Kirk to assimilate him, because Steve Schmeling says with Kirk's superpower, if he encountered the Borg, do you think he would have talked them into offing themselves? Yes, I think he would have. Yeah. That, the thing they were going to do to the Borg with Hugh, where Data and Geordi came up with like that impossible shape that they were going to feed into his memory so that the Borg would keep trying to analyze it. And then eventually their systems would go offline because they wouldn't be able to figure it out. Kirk would do that, in spoken form in a couple of minutes, and problem solved. Okay, here's a super chat from Kirok who says, one of my best friends ever and I argued to no end. He thinks Kirk's racist behavior is so uncharacteristic. Believe me, Steve, we argued to no end. I mean, Kirk's racism in Star Trek VI is part of his character arc. Like, that's what I don't get. Like, people who say, I mean, William Shatner is one of these people who's like, I don't think they should have written Kirk that way. Kirk wouldn't do that. That's part of his character arc. He starts out as racist to Klingons, and then he realizes that he has to move past it by the end of the movie. That's his story in the movie. Like, people who have a problem with that, or who are uncomfortable acknowledging that Kirk is racist toward Klingons. My God, the dude says, like, Spock is like, the Klingons have accidentally poisoned their atmosphere of their planet and they're all going to suffocate, and I think we should help them out. And Kirk's response is, let them die. And he also refers to them as animals. He's racist. Kirk is racist against Klingons in Star Trek VI. At first. And then he deals with it. He grapples with the consequences of it. He overcomes it by the end. Like, it's part of his character arc. Why would anybody have a problem with that? It is beyond me. I know you agree with me. I know we agree on this, Kirk. I'm just saying, like, I'm amazed that, people who do have a problem with it are so, stubborn about it. It's like, did you watch the movie? Did you not get one of the major points of the movie is that he overcomes it? Yeah. Okay, 255 AD says, I said happy birthday to my grandfather, then looked to the other tables. I didn't expect him to be there and was like, oh no, if I stay longer, I'll have to talk to them, then left. I have never related to you more than when I just read that. That is exactly how I would have felt, and that's exactly what I would have done. Oh shit, they're here. I'm out. Absolutely. All right. It's after 8 here. I've been going for about 2 hours. I am going to start wrapping things up. So if anybody has any final comments or questions or whatever, please throw them into the chat in the next minute or so, and I will get back to them after I get through my end of stream spiel. And then that'll be it. So first of all, thank you all so much for watching. If you like the work that I do here on YouTube and you want to become a supporter of this channel, you can do so in a couple of ways. You can become a Patreon patron by going to patreon.com/Steve Shives. You can also become a channel member by clicking the join button right there on the YouTube page. And if you become a patron or a channel member for any amount of money, for any monthly pledge from $1 a month on up to however much you want to give me, you get access to certain perks as a member and as a patron. And one of those perks is you get to submit questions ahead of time for these twice monthly Ask Away live streams. And those are the questions that I answer in the first part of the show that have been sent in earlier in the week from my wonderful patrons and channel members. And if you enjoy this work that I do here on YouTube, if it means something to you, and of course, if you can afford it, I would love it if you would become a supporter of the channel with a monthly donation, either by becoming a patron or by becoming a channel member. I really, really appreciate it. And thank you so much to all of my members and all of my patrons. I could not do this without you. Thank you so much. And of course, unfortunately, I am not the only person in need of monthly support. In fact, there are a lot of people who need it a lot more than I do. And that is why we have the charitylinks.page link in the video description of all of my videos, including this one. And in the, if you click on that link, it will take you to a Google Doc that is maintained by our friend Some Random Geek, who is also putting individual links in the live chat right now. Please make note of those. And these are links of people who need a helping hand. And these are links to their PayPal or their Venmo or their GoFundMe pages, who are, undergoing some financial crisis, who need help making the rent, making the bills, putting food on the table. Maybe they have some unforeseen medical costs that they're struggling to pay. So if you have a few extra dollars and you want to send it toward a good cause, please consider going to charitylinks.page and sending a few dollars to some of our friends who need a helping hand. They would appreciate it, and then I would appreciate it as well. Also, one last thing, if you enjoy the stuff I do here on YouTube, you might also enjoy the podcasts that I am on, including the Late Seating podcast, which I co-host alongside the great Jason Harding, where we review classic films. Our newest episode went up just, I think it technically went up yesterday, but it goes up either Thursday or Friday. And it's a slight change of plans. At the end of our previous episode of Late Seating, we said we were going to do the Blues Brothers next. But what had happened was Jason and I both forgot that our next two episodes of Late Seating will be in October, and our tradition on Late Seating is our October episodes are about scary movies because it's spooky season. So we changed plans. We did a little bit of a course correction, and the new episode of Late Seating that is up right now is our review of, I swear to God, one of my favorite movies ever, the original 1933 Universal horror classic, The Invisible Man, starring Claude Rains as the Invisible One. One of my favorite movies. And we reviewed it for the new episode of Late Seating. That is up. And in addition to Late Seating, I also do another podcast that is Star Trek related. So if you dig my Star Trek stuff and you want to hear me do some more Star Trek related stuff, it's the Ensign's Log, a Star Trek themed improv comedy podcast starring myself and the aforementioned Jason Harding and the incredibly talented Dana Cole, who is with us in the live chat. And on the show, Dana and Jason and I portray characters who exist in the Star Trek universe, and we sort of have our own adventures while Star Trek stuff is happening in the background, and it's a ton of fun to do. And if you enjoy Star Trek, and if you especially enjoy funny Star Trek stuff, and you haven't been listening to the Ensign's Log, I would highly recommend that you listen to the Ensign's Log. So links to the podcasts are in the video description. Please check them out if you are so inclined. And thank you so much for those of you who do. All right, let's see some final questions here before I wrap things up. Yeah, Steve, exactly. Spock, Jim, they're dying. Kirk, fuck them. Kirak, I agree with you. I agree that Star Trek 2 and Star Trek 6 are the best. Well, I don't think they're the best films ever, but they're the best Star Trek films ever for sure. Oh, Flynn Game says, my last comment, you're awesome. Well, thank you. That's very nice of you to say. Hand of Omega says, Orville rules. Thank you. Hey, I love the Orville, especially the last season. The most recent season was terrific. 255 AG says, how would you feel about a young Picard show played by the actor who plays young Jack Crusher? I don't know if I'd want that actor playing him. I mean, I don't have any problem. I mean, I don't have any problem with that actor. I think that actor was fine and did just fine with what he was given to do in the third season of Picard. But I think it's a little cutesy to be like, have him played by the same actor as the young version of Picard. I don't have any problem in theory with a Picard prequel where it's about a younger version of Picard. I mean, it would all come down to the story. I would prefer if they did a show, as I've said many times, I would prefer if they did a Star Trek show where it was all new characters, where there were no legacy characters at all, and it was just all new characters and all new stories. But, if they wanted to do a young Picard show, as long as it was well written, as long as there was a point to it other than, just throwing Easter eggs at the screen, I think it could be fine. And Kirok asks, how is Jason? Jason is doing well. Day to day, Jason is good. Jason, he has a heart condition. He's living with heart failure. That's always going to be an issue. He has a lot of medical debt, which is hence the GoFundMe, which really helps. And thank you to everybody who contributed to that or shared that around. I'll probably share that around again at some point if he needs, another infusion of funds. But he's not in an ideal situation. There are still bad days and good days, but overall, in general, I think he's doing okay, which I'm very grateful for. Yeah. Okay, last question. This is from Steve Schmeling. Last question, and then that's the end of the show. Favorite Enterprise design? The movie version of the original Enterprise. The refit version that we saw for the first time in Star Trek: The Motion Picture is my favorite Enterprise. Second place is probably the Discovery / Strange New Worlds version of the original Enterprise. It's a close second because I really, really love the current, the Strange New Worlds Enterprise. I really love that ship. It looks just beautiful. But my favorite is the movie version of Kirk's Enterprise, and also the Enterprise A because it's the same thing. But yeah, that's my favorite. The movie version of the classic Enterprise. Kira, I like the Enterprise E too. The Enterprise E gets some undeserved flack, I think, sometimes. 'Cause I really like the Enterprise E as well, but the movie version of Kirk's Enterprise is my favorite. All right, that's it, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me. Have a happy Friday the 13th. What's left of it? Hopefully you have good luck instead of bad. And have a good rest of your night. Have a good weekend. And I will see you next time, everybody. I think Trek Reluctantly is off next week as well because Dana still has stuff to do. But we will be back the week after next on Wednesday with another Trek Reluctantly. So no Trek Reluctantly this coming week either. But we'll be back soon with that. And then I'll be back in 2 weeks for another one of these. So thank you all so much for watching. And take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.